introduce Donna so you guys all know who we're talking to. Donna Hartl. Donna Hartl is a shareholder in the Chicago office of Roetzel and Andress. She's both an attorney and a CPA, which means she's really, really smart, and focuses her time on tax planning, tax dispute work, estate planning, guardianship, probate, and trust administration. I know we've used Donna quite a bit in the past whenever we have some tax-related issues in our divorce cases. So we're hoping that Donna can answer a couple questions regarding her area of law. She does have a particular expertise in crafting creative and effective resolutions for federal, state, and local tax planning issues and dispute work, which is where we use her a lot when we're drafting our marital settlement agreements to make sure that the tax ramifications work out for everybody's agreement. Donna also advises on succession planning, administration, and transfer of assets, estate and gift tax returns, and minor and adult guardianships, which is really interesting. She advises individuals, businesses, and nonprofit organizations or philanthropic planning matters, including charitable gift planning, creation and maintaining nonprofit organizations, and counseling charitable organizations on tax compliance issues. Well, Donna, I have to say, whenever I do my introduction, I just get up and say, I do divorce law, and it's a lot easier than all of that I just said.
Great.
Well, thank you, Kim.
Say hi to everyone.
Hello. Welcome to everybody. Hope everybody survived the storm just fine.
Yeah, we all did.
Good.
Some people got free trampolines, but other than that, they were fine.
Some people got what?
Free trampolines. There were like trampolines.
One blow into your yard?
Well, no, in Chicago, in the city of Chicago, I read that there were like a bunch of trampolines flying around into people's yards who didn't previously own them.
Wow.
So,
I had not heard that.
Yeah. So I know we've used you, Donna, before, especially when we're in the drafting stage of the marital settlement agreement. We call it MSA. A lot of people transfer assets in that and don't really know, how it's going to affect them at tax time. Can you tell, everyone what goes into that when you're looking into advising us on that type of thing?
Oh, sure. There's a lot of things that, we can help with when you're drafting an MSA. For example, it's something as simple as how should they file their tax return while they're going through a divorce? How should they file a tax return the year of the divorce? Whether you should do married filing joint or married filing separate. And after your divorce, should you just do single or should you do head of household? When you're married, the less tax way to do it is to do married filing joint. But sometimes you're concerned about the ex-spouse and not knowing what their tax liabilities may or may not be. And so I often say, think about it, run the numbers, try married filing separate. You will definitely owe more tax together than you would if you filed joint. But if you file married filing separate, you can go back later once those tax issues are resolved within a certain period of time and amend and do married filing joint and get that excess back.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, at least doing married filing separate, you're protected until all the tax issues are shaken out.
Donna, how long do you have to go back and amend? Like how many tax years?
I believe it's 2 years. There's a little more complicated rules about that, but general rule of thumb is 2 years.
Yeah, and I guess I don't ever recommend a joint married if the other spouse is not a W-2 wage earner, or taxes haven't been filed for 5 years. I'm just like, I don't know why, then I typically don't advise my client to file together because it's kind of like worried about the tax and the questionable, bookkeeping sometimes.
Right. And if you do married filing separate, if the other spouse does owe taxes, then the IRS cannot come after the non-owing spouse's assets for that year.
What about just filing like a little blurb in the MSA that says, I'm not going to be responsible? does that get me past the IRS, or is that like, because the IRS is not a part of this agreement. So I would think that if we said in our MSA that, you know, like my client's not going to be responsible if should it be a problem, the IRS isn't necessarily going to comply with that, is it?
No, they don't care. They don't care.
Well, that was easy. They don't care.
Well, because the agreement's not with them. So
Right.
the agreement with the IRS is what you file on your return. And if you filed married filing separate, you're saying, IRS, I'm not liable for the other person's taxes. So that's if you want an agreement with the IRS not to be responsible, then you have to file married filing separate until you can feel confident that married filing joint isn't going to put you in detriment.
Yeah.
Couldn't you do an indemnification though, so that if they were, like if the IRS were to come after you, then you could go after your ex for all of the fees that you have to spend, making them pay it instead? You know, I guess it's not really an IRS issue.
It's not an IRS issue, and then you're back in court, and then you're back fighting. I still suggest married filing separate if you've got any issue whatsoever.
And then what's with the filing that, what am I trying to think of? Innocent spouse. Is that already like the debt's there and the IRS is breathing down your neck, and then you try and file something like that?
Yeah, innocent spouse is generally when you go to the IRS and you say, hey, I didn't know a thing about this. It was all the other person's problem, not mine. And I never knew about it. The issue you're going to have with that is it's not a slam dunk, because everybody does say that. And if you've been living a lifestyle that is not supported by the numbers that were on your tax return, if it was joint, the IRS is going to counter and say, you know, you should have known.
So that house, that big house in the boat off of the minimum wage earner,
Right.
You think is a red flag?
Mm-hmm.
Who knew?
So you can do innocent spouse, but I generally say be cautious about that and really have that looked at, because that is not as easy a thing as a lot of people think it might be.
Yeah.
Just saying you didn't know isn't enough.
Good, then I've been giving good advice. You're right.
We always like to know that after the fact.
Has it? They come into our office and they're like, well, I'm going to file for innocent spouse because they read about it on the internet. And it's like, well, in practical application, you might have some problems.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the fastest way to settle a case is when somebody files a shady tax return. Because taking that to trial, you know, judges sometimes will just say, settle it. I don't want to hear any more.
Right.
Yeah. But that's the problem, because 90% of the time they filed jointly, you know? And so then they're like, well, you know, I know that he like made some cash. I'm like, you might not want to say that on the stand, you know, because you signed a joint tax return, you know, like, come on. Yeah, I've had judges stop the entire proceedings over an answer like that and just say, you know, lawyers in the back, let's talk about this. And then, you know, the judge is like, does she understand what she's saying? I'm like, yeah.
And other things you can think about with the MSA is the type of assets that you're splitting up between you. As long as you move assets between two people that are married pursuant to a divorce, there's no tax consequences.
Right.
But then you also step into the shoes of the person who gave you the asset. So for example, the marital house. We represent the wife who's divorcing the husband. The husband leaves her the house, because as they're splitting in numbers, they look at the fair value of the house and split it in half and say, okay, so she gets that half. However, that also means she's going to get all the capital gains tax that isn't excluded when she sells it. So it's also good to figure out the tax consequences that might be attached to an asset when you decide you want it in a divorce. Calculating the tax cost of that is also helpful.
What do you do with it? You know, like if it's common, you know, we sell a house during the divorce, and if there's no language in there whatsoever, you know, and they're not married by the time, you know, it's tax season or to pay taxes, what do they do with their capital gains?
In general, I would split it in half. Although you could potentially argue if you can trace that all the money came from just one person, or if it was always an 80-20 split of the mortgage and the down payment, et cetera, you can at least have an argument to allocate the basis between the two. But to the extent you can get it in the MSA, all the better.
Yeah.
Other things for the MSA, life insurance. You know, quite often you put life insurance requirements of a spouse to benefit the other spouse in order to support alimony and child support payments. But then the MSA sometimes stops short of that. And even though this isn't a tax issue, it doesn't say, but who's going to be the trustee? Or if it does say that, it doesn't say, well, what happens after alimony stops? Or what happens after the child support payments are no longer necessary? It's usually not the intention that the life insurance should continue on to benefit the exiting spouse the way it is. So
Right.
you always should provide what should happen at the end of that obligation as well. Or what happens if the person, if the insured dies right before the last payment? Mm-hmm. Is it really intended that a $2 million policy should really go to the other side?
Right.
There's a lot of those nuances that often aren't covered in the MSAs, and it's thoughtful to think through if you can.
Yeah, it should diminish. We always write that too, you know, it diminishes every year so that they can break it up and make, you know, someone a beneficiary. But, you know, the problem I see more often than not is making the children beneficiaries. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, they have to like go into court and open up an estate for the child in order to get the money. Whereas if they had just left it, and they could still be married sometimes, you know, and they just list the child as the beneficiary. And I think do you think that's a problem? I've seen it to be a huge problem.
It is a problem, and I have seen it. I've had to go to court on that as well. I like to recommend that if the life insurance is going to be in a separate trust, that the trust itself provides that if the child's a minor, it's held in trust for the benefit of that child until they reach an age where you don't have to go into court for that purpose.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons to keep things in trust because you don't know who the child's spouse is going to be.
Right.
What they're like. So trusts are always a good thing. But with an MSA, that's also something pretty important. Who's the custodial parent is important too. Because generally the custodial person would get the deduction for the child, for the dependency, but it doesn't have to be. But if the non-custodial parent wants to give the dependency exemption to the other spouse, there's a tax form that has to be signed.
Right.
And attached to the tax returns. And so keep that in mind. Child care credits are different. Child care credits generally only go with the custodial parent. So that's different than the dependency exemption.
What do we do when there's a 50-50 split? Alternate it?
I've seen it alternated. Yeah. I mean, actually the most recent MSAs I've seen are actually saying you take it 1 year, I'll take it the other year. And right. that's how they're technically splitting it. Right. The IRS won't let you take half a child.
A 0.5? No 0.5?
No 0.5. And when the divorce is done, you should update your W-4 with your employer, because your withholding should be recalculated and changed because your tax position is going to be different going forward.
Right.
So a small thing like that, update your estate plan, change the beneficiaries on your life insurance.
Jessica had a huge case like that, right? I think they went to Washington to argue it. Wasn't that where didn't change the beneficiary, Jessica?
It was a survivor benefit policy, like a survivor benefit plan with a government employer. And the person had divorced a first spouse and then remarried subsequently. And there's like very specific things you're supposed to do when you change the beneficiary, and there's notifications on documents that you get in the mail. And so there was this whole to do, because I think the person thought they changed it to their wife, but it was really still named the person they divorced. And the MSA didn't say anything about this benefit. So it was just a disaster. The two wives were fighting over it.
I see that a lot. And people think if you sign a change of beneficiary form, that's enough, but it isn't. You have to actually get that change to the insurance company and make sure it gets registered.
Mhm.
So just signing it and keeping it at home doesn't help.
You call them, they send you the form, you sign it. You're saying that's not enough?
You have to send it back to them.
Oh, well, sure. Yeah.
No, I can tell you how many times we find it in the file and it never got sent in.
Oh, really? Ugh.
Yeah.
So is it any good then or no? Because the person
Nope.
already died.
No.
So if they signed it and dated it but didn't send it back in, it's still no good?
Yeah, because you can't prove that they intended to send it back.
Wow. Oh, I see. Yeah.
So, maybe you could go to court on it, but it's usually not a good thing.
Yeah. Wow.
We're getting a lot of phone calls from people that are in situations like that were never married. Like they didn't even divorce, they just were never married. And their partner, that's how they refer to the person. They were with them for 40 years or 50 years. And they're like, how do I get their retirement account? And I'm like, well, did they have a will? I mean, what do you mean? And they're like, but we're in a domestic partnership. Well, that's not really a thing except for insurance. That doesn't give you the right type. I don't know if we're getting like a ton of calls about that lately. I don't know. It's sad.
Well, I think COVID is affecting a lot of people.
Yeah.
And frankly, because of COVID, I think this is the time to really be checking if all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted.
Sure.
For sure.
But it is very common to come up with wills or life insurance or beneficiary designations where people just forgot. Quitclaim deeds. The MSA says the spouse gets the house and then somehow the deed never gets prepared or maybe not recorded.
Right.
So
we try to do that before we even get, it's one of the finalization papers is to have that. Because if you don't get it before they divorce, it is such a pain, to get them to sign it, and there's a lot of litigation then afterwards. So yeah, I like to have it ready to go. And then the divorce is finalized and then that person signs it. But of course we're doing these online now. So.
Well, I have to say the problems I've seen have never been with your firm. So,
right. Because
we're good there.
You got to get it done. It's a pain, it's just like when people they put it in the MSA that the retirement benefits will be divided. And then people come back years later, it's unbelievable how many years later. And they're like, he quit working, but we never did get, our quadro entered or the quildro entered. And I'm like, oh my God.
My 15 emails when I was emailing you about this at the end of your case. That's why.
Yeah. But I mean, we get post-decree work that comes in, and she's like, can you just get this quadro entered? It's been 8 years. I'm like, oh my God, of course. God forbid he had died during the meantime. Then we really would have been in a world of hurt.
Or they start to pay out. They find out that the spouse is getting their portion.
Yeah, right.
Retirement.
What about mine?
Didn't even know that there was a spouse entitled to anything.
Right.
Oh, well, speaking of that, that's another big change lately with respect to taxes, the whole alimony and child support arena.
Yeah.
For forever, alimony was always deductible by the payor and income to the recipient. And the law changed a couple years back. I think, and you will know more than me, but I believe the divorce had to be finalized by January 31st of 2018. For alimony to continue to be deductible. But if it was done after that, it's not. But also, if you modify it after that date, you can change deductible to non-deductible, I think, or that's the default.
I think it was December 31st of 2018.
Yeah, I think it was at the end of the year because we worked like dogs that year.
Was it calendar year? Okay, so maybe I'm thinking by January 1st, and that's
that was crazy. Yeah, and it can still be tax deductible in the modification or the extension. You just have to make sure you phrase it in there. So
you both have to agree to that, right?
Yeah. And it's generally if people want an extension, maybe they weren't entitled to. That the guys definitely are, the gal is definitely going to want to make sure that if they're agreeing to pay more longer, that they continue to get that tax break. Donna, we have a question for you from Mia. Mia wants to know, she says, what should I do if my husband claimed me on taxes and I have not lived I have not lived with home, I think with him maybe, for over 1 year, and he also collected the stimulus money. Maybe you can talk to us about the stimulus money too while you're at it.
I will. Good segue. Claim band.
Like filed jointly?
I can't tell if they're married or divorced. So I'm going to.
Well, she says my husband, so I'm imagining she's married. Claimed me on taxes, and I have not lived, I guess, at home for over 1 year.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if we have enough information.
I'm not sure we do, but if she's saying that he claimed her as a dependent because they're divorced, if she disagrees, she can still file her own return. I mean, they will probably both get a letter saying from the IRS saying, hey, you can't be on 2 returns.
Right.
But it's still her call of what to file. If he filed married filing joint and she did not do this, then there's an issue of somebody signed her name that shouldn't have.
We get that a lot too.
But it doesn't mean she can't file her own return. Just know that there will be an issue, that there will be a follow-up letter.
Yeah. It's like when you used to claim the child, both parties, then the IRS would send a letter back and say, send me the proof, because like you say, you can't be on 2. So show me who's got the proof.
Right.
That you're allowed to take.
The stimulus money is a different issue. I don't know enough to answer why he got the stimulus money, meaning that in the year that they calculated it, they were still married. So the IRS thought they were still married.
Yeah, she's saying she was separated. So I guess not divorced.
There is, get on irs.gov and get into the section on the stimulus payments and see if there is some guidance there. There is also a hotline number to call for the stimulus payments. Unfortunately, I want to say kind of good luck trying to call the IRS right now because not everybody's answering their phone, but that's your best bet right now. I will tell you one thing people don't know about the stimulus payments, and this may help her shake this out at the end, is that technically the stimulus payment is an advance on a credit that's going to be on your 2020 return. And the credit is based on your 2020 numbers. The checks that everybody got were an estimate of what your 2020 numbers were going to be based on either 2019 or 2018, whatever was available. And so what happens is when you file your 2020 return, you're going to calculate the credit, and then the stimulus check is going to be considered in advance on that credit. Now, if your income went down in 2020, you might actually get a bigger credit than what your stimulus check was, and that will then increase your refund. If your income went up in 2020, or if the amount you got was too high, you're not going to have to return that money. So
that's good news.
Yeah, so it's good. Now, with what Mia's got going, I am guessing that what might also help her is in 2020, she figures out her own credit, and then she shows she didn't receive anything. But again, expect to get a letter saying, hey, we don't understand this from the IRS. It probably will happen.
So she would be a good candidate to file separate, married.
If she is married, yeah.
Yeah. She says she's separated. So it sounds like she may want to do a separate return from him anyway.
Okay. And when we talk about separate, let's talk about there's legal separation for divorce purposes. And then there's married filing separate. Married filing separate, you could still be living with the person and not be separated.
Right.
You can always file married filing separate, even if everything else is okay. You're just doing it really for tax reasons.
Perfect.
And and before the question comes in, I have no idea what's going on with if there's going to be more rounds of stimulus checks.
The next question that's coming.
Yeah, I know that. Other things to consider, I think we checked off alimony, we checked off the W-4, asset transfers. Oh, to the extent that you get tax advice during your divorce, those legal fees can potentially be deductible if you file a Schedule A itemized deductions on your return. Now, in order for that to work, you have to have your legal fees, your legal invoices separately state or separately allocate the fees to what is for tax advice. And to that extent, you might be able to also deduct some of your legal fees from divorce onto your tax return.
So couldn't they just use your invoice?
If you use somebody separate like me, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, because we can't give tax advice at all. Mm-hmm. So that'll never affect us. But I know I've had people ask in the past about for maintenance, like if they actually, it used to be, I don't know if it still is, maybe you can opine, that if you had an attorney who was arguing for maintenance for you, that you could deduct some of those fees.
Right.
Is that still the case?
Well, he's not taxable anymore, so it's really not tax advice.
Right.
So I think the answer was it depends. How far back did this relate?
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
January 1, 2019 was the day the world changed for maintenance. So.
Yeah. You may also want to. I'm sorry. Do you have any other questions on that?
No.
Because you may also want to consider how the CARES Act affects. Because we were talking about retirement plans. Mm-hmm. There's things that are available because of the CARES Act and COVID-19 that weren't available before. A lot of people are able to defer loan payments on a loan they had from their 401k plan up to a year if it was taken out before March 27th. They can get a distribution without the penalties for early distribution up to $100,000 that they couldn't before. Older people can defer their minimum required distributions from plans when they couldn't before. So, and other people can take the distribution and take the income tax hit on it, but spread it out over 3 years. So there's a lot of other options available that they should consider. Speaking of retirement plans, I can think of a case that came up recently. Taxes and one spouse owing taxes comes up more often than you think because nobody ever wants to talk about that. And so it kind of spills out in divorce. And so a lot of times people come to me and they say, you know, I'm on the hook because I owed these joint taxes. So I want to get rid of them. You know, what do I do? And the IRS has something they call the Fresh Start program, which frankly is the same program that's been around for 30 plus years. It's called the Offer and Compromise program, where you go to the IRS and say, you know what? I don't care how much it is. I don't care if it's $1 million. I still can't pay it. It's never going to happen. And you can go in and you can show the IRS, listen, this is what I have for assets. This is what I have for future income capability. As you can see, both of those together is never going to pay off this debt. What can I do? You can go in on an offer. And sometimes what I've done is I've counseled people if they come to me before the divorce is final, where we can kind of analyze which assets the spouse that owes the money should get as opposed to other assets. Because when the IRS is evaluating what they want to take, sometimes they take 80% of the number of a certain asset, whereas they'll take 100% of another when they're doing their calculations. So don't assume you should wait till after the divorce to then deal with the taxes, because sometimes during the divorce, we can be creative, which is why, by the way, we threw poker into the title of this program.
Oh my God, I forgot about the poker.
Because as you can see from what we're talking about, it's all strategy.
Yeah.
It isn't just a black and white rule. You should do this, you should do that. It's really, okay, what do you have? What are you holding? And how do you play it? And how do you figure, you also have to figure out what the other side wants. Whether the other side is the divorcing spouse or the other side is the IRS. as long as you know what the other side might want and listen and read that, you really can strategize. And what I say is play poker with what you want to get, what you want to achieve, and what it is you offer and what it is you hold back.
Are some of those strategies closed to you once the divorce is finalized? Because you can always amend, right? So can you go back at any time, really? And
you can always amend, but there are certain things. You know, even though alimony is not taxable anymore, the IRS considers the recipient's receipt of alimony in figuring out what the IRS wants from you when you're trying to negotiate with them. So they don't just look at taxable income, they look at all income. Some strategies are closed. I mean, if you do a quadro and you limit the amount of retirement income each person's going to have, that will limit the amount of assets available to offer. I had somebody come to me recently and they wanted to withdraw all their 401k money so they could make the down payment for the IRS on their offer. I suggest not to do that, because if you withdraw the money, the IRS sees that. And once it's out of your retirement plan, they count they count it as 100% of cash.
Yeah, sure.
And they don't take into consideration the tax you're going to have to pay on withdrawing the money. If it's still in the retirement plan when you file your offer, the IRS automatically discounts that number by 20%, because it takes into consideration you're going to pay tax by withdrawing it. So things aren't always available after the divorce, such as if you pull money out too soon. Okay. So the answer is it depends on the asset.
Yeah. Yeah, we put together, you know, when we're doing the divorce case, you know, a spreadsheet, you know, so we can allocate all the assets to each party. And it seems like nobody ever wants to give up, you know, their pension, that they'll give up nearly every liquid asset they have to avoid the spouse touching the pension. What do you think about that type of division? Is there any benefit, or there's a horrible disincentive to do something like that?
Depends on what you're factoring in for the allocation. If you can survive without needing the liquid assets, then the pension is always going to and especially a 401k is going to have the ability to grow tax deferred for as long as you can until you take it out. Whereas any cash you get on hand, even if you invest it, you're going to be taxed on those earnings. So there is some benefit to sheltering it inside a tax deferred vehicle. But if you need the money, negotiate it now, because otherwise you're going to have to factor in that you're going to pay taxes on that money when you withdraw it.
Right.
So there's that issue with that. I think a lot of people need to calculate the tax of what they're keeping in the future versus the fact that there's no tax on transfer between spouses now. I think that makes a difference. A couple other things I've seen. I've seen in MSAs where they'll negotiate if there's a refund coming, who gets it, allocating it to one spouse. That works fine if the refund is good. But
isn't any refund good?
I've got one where the IRS is challenging the refund amount.
Oh, really?
If it gets cut down and the MSA does not provide for a change,
right, you're out.
Yeah, you got to think about it. So it's one of those. The MSA works fine when you're thinking through all the assets, but you should think through what if it goes south? What if something with respect to that goes south? What if insurance premiums aren't paid? What if the 401k market tanks? What if that refund you're going to get from the IRS doesn't come because there was a problem on the return? I just suggest that as you're negotiating these MSAs, you think through the what ifs, even though the what ifs might not happen.
Yeah, we spent our whole life doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
For sure. Because you just never know what's happening. Oh my God.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
There is none coming in at the time. Is there anything else you want to cover, Donna?
Don't forget about state taxes and the effect of that when you're thinking of state issues. You know, states don't tax pensions, but states will tax other things.
It's good to know. Yeah.
When you're looking at if you think you're going to go in on an offer in compromise, the IRS counts assets differently if you're in a community property state than if you're not. So I think my parting words are, advice is to consult with a tax person sooner rather than later, because it's easier to maneuver and plan before the MSA is inked than after. Because even if we give good advice, the poker strategy will tell you that you need to get the other side to agree to it while they're still wanting something in return. So that the strategy is do as much as you can before the MSA is inked than after.
Yeah. Well, great, Donna. I really appreciate you coming and giving us all your wealth of information. I know we use it all the time, you know.
I enjoy it. I actually enjoy working with other divorce counsel because they really help be creative in strategizing how to get things done.
Yeah.
And you've been so helpful to us on so many of our cases. Thank you so much. You're just a wealth of information on the stuff that we can't legally advise people on. So
yeah, nor do I want to try. Yeah.
I'm going to tell everyone how to find you.
Yes. Donna Hartl, Hartl, at Roetzel Andress at 30 North LaSalle. D. Hartl at ralaw.com. Or frankly, if you Google Donna Hartl, Chicago tax attorney, it will pop up. But I'm at Roetzel.
She is everywhere.
I am everywhere.
Okay, Donna, well, thanks so much. And I guess we'll chat next time we have a case together.
Okay,
or
sounds
sooner.
good.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for listening in.
And we'll see you next Tuesday on Talk Tuesday.